Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. So in today's video we will be looking into AWS Pod Identity Agent, right? So let's assume we have one EKS cluster and within this EKS cluster there are multiple deployments running, out of which there's one deployment which needs access to maybe AWS S3 bucket or maybe DynamoDB or maybe any other AWS service, right? So how this can be done? So this can be done using two ways. So there is one way doing is IRSA, which stands for IAM role for service account, right? And there's another way of doing this is pod identity agent, right? I'll just simplify this like IPIA, pod identity agent. So the other way is pod identity agent, right? So uh, there are things like using IRSA will have to authorize the service accounts using OpenID Connect, right? We'll have to create the OIDC provider in AWS IAM, and using that, a particular service account in EKS cluster would be able to assume that IAM role and will get access to those policies that are mentioned in this particular IAM role, right? So there's one. This is the one way of doing this. There's another way of doing this is using pod identity agent, where we'll have to create an IAM role. So this IAM role will have a trust policy of pods.eks.amazonaws.com, right? And using that, a particular service account in an EKS cluster would be able to get access to this particular IAM role, right? So there are things that we'll have to deploy in EKS cluster. There are agents that we'll need to deploy. So pod identity agent is something that we'll have to deploy in EKS cluster. So all these things we'll try to demonstrate in a demo video. So in this demo video, what I'll try to cover is IRSA and pod identity agent both. So first I'll go with IRSA, and I'll show you how we can set it up and how we can allow particular pod in Kubernetes cluster to be able to access S3 bucket, right? So yeah, let's jump to AWS console. So within my AWS, I already have one Kubernetes cluster, and this particular Kubernetes cluster has two EKS nodes that is up and running. So if I'll go to my terminal and if I'll do kubectl get nodes, I could see there are two nodes which are in ready state. I don't have any deployment yet. So the first thing is let's create a deployment here. So I'll create a deployment of Nginx. So I'll just quickly type, quickly run the command kubectl create deployment Nginx using image Nginx, right? So if I'll do kubectl get pods, I could see there's one Nginx pod that's coming up. Okay, as you can see, my Nginx pod is up and running, and I have done nothing as of now. So if I'll go into this Nginx pod and try to execute AWS S3 ls command, I won't be able to get any S3 bucket because I haven't configured any access till now, right? So let's give it a try. I know it's going to fail, but yeah, let's, because I'm using this Nginx pod, it doesn't have AWS CLI installed. So I'll just quickly install the AWS CLI here. I'll follow AWS documentation to install AWS CLI. I don't go with apt install because that used to install the older version of AWS CLI, but I need the updated one. So I'll go to that AWS documentation, and from there I'll install that AWS CLI. So I'll go AWS install AWS CLI on Ubuntu. So this is the AWS documentation. So if I'll go to Linux, I'll copy this command over here. I'll paste it. I'll unzip the package AWS this, and I'll go AWS install. Okay, so I have AWS CLI installed on my Nginx pod. If I'll do AWS version, you could see this is the AWS CLI version that has been installed. And if I'll run the same command with AWS S3 ls, I won't be able to see any of the bucket because I don't have access, right? So to do this, what we need to do is we'll have to create that IRSA first, right? So how I'll do that is I'll go to my AWS console, and from here, the first thing is we'll have to create the identity provider in IAM. So that I already have created. I'll show you how it can be created again. I'll just delete the one that I created, and let's wait. Yeah, so it has been deleted. I'll create the identity provider first. So when we create an EKS cluster, we used to get this OpenID Connect provider URL, right? Using this, we would be able to create an IAM identity provider in AWS IAM. So I'll create an provider here. I'll give it a name. So okay, sorry. So this should be OpenID Connect, right? Because EKS cluster is used to provide OpenID Connect provider URL. So this is the URL that we are going to use, and I'll paste the URL here. I'll copy the URL. I'll paste the URL here, and within audience it should be sts.amazonaws.com, and I'll add the provider. So once the provider is added, what I'll have to do is I'll have to create an IAM role. So I'll go to my IAM role page. Over here I'll create a role, and this role should be web identity, right? Because and service account within that AWS EKS cluster, a service account is going to be access is going to assume this particular IAM role, right? So it needs to be web identity, and within web identity we could see an identity provider that we just created, right? And the audience that we have also created with the same identity provider that we will select here. This is going to be sts.amazonaws.com, and over here we are going to give S3 read only access, and I'll give it a name. Let's say IAM role for S3 bucket, right? And I'll give it IRSA because this is the one which is going to be assumed using IAM role of service count, right? I'll create the role. So the role has been created, and now the thing is that particular pod needs to access that IAM role. So how it's going to happen is we have an EKS cluster. Within this EKS cluster, we have a namespace, and this is a default namespace where we are running our engine export, right? Within this namespace, we have a pod, right? And there will be a service account that we are going to create now. So using this service account, this pod is going to access that IAM role that we have created. So we have created an IAM role in AWS. So within this service account, we'll have to pass the role ARN. Right. So the first thing is we'll have to create this service account, and within this service account, we'll have to pass the role ARN. And the third, so this is going to be the second thing. We'll have to pass the role ARN, and the third thing would be within this pod, we'll have to add a metadata to allow service account, right? So this pod will use this particular service account to get all the authentication tokens and everything, right? So now the first thing is we'll have to create a service account. So within our Kubernetes cluster, I'll create a service account and I'll give it a name Nginx. So I'll go okay, create service account, name Nginx, right? And within this service account, I'll have to pass this role ARN. So I'll have to add an annotation within this IAM role, right? So I'll just search for that uh, particular annotation. So I'll go with the kubectl patch service account IAM role ARN. So there's a kubectl patch command that I can run here. So it should be kubectl. Yeah, this is the command, right? So I'll copy this command. I'll paste it here. I'll modify the thing. So kubectl annotate service account namespace. I can leave it because by default it's going to be the default namespace which I'm using. But if there's any other namespace that this service account is in, you can select -n and then the namespace. and then the service account is going to be Nginx. This is the name of the service account, and this is the annotation that we are going to add within that service account. So over here, I'll have to pass the IAM role that we just created. So I'll go to my AWS console. This is the role. Over here, I'll just copy the ARN and I'll paste it here. I'll enter it. Okay, so I tried the kubectl annotate command without hyphen n, without namespace, so it didn't work over here. But when I tried it with the namespace, so it worked. So maybe we'll have to pass the namespace here. It didn't pick the default namespace by default, so I thought it should be, but yeah. So if I see my service account kubectl get namespace, so there's an nginx namespace, and if I'll get this namespace in a YAML format, so I could see there's an annotation added, right? So if I'll go to my notepad, so over here we have created the service account. We have the role attached to this particular service account. Now the third thing is we'll have to add that metadata in our pods configuration file so that it can use this particular service account, right? So that I'll do is, because I'm using a deployment here, I'll just update my deployment to use that particular service account. So what I'll do is kubectl edit deployment nginx in my default namespace. So within my deployments specification, I'll add a service account here. So it should be service account name, and I'll give it the nginx service account. So this particular service account is going to be mapped with all the pods that are part of this particular deployment, right? I'll just quickly save this particular deployment, and if I'll do kubectl get pods, I could see my pods should get restarted. A new pod is coming up. So this particular new pod will have that particular service account, which will have that access to that IAM role that we just created. So once this particular pod is up and running, we'll try to execute that AWS S3 ls command again, and we'll see if we are getting that access to that S3 bucket. Right? Okay, so I have my AWS CLI installed, and if I'll try to do AWS S3 ls from here, I could see my S3 bucket is up and running, right? This is using IRSA. There is one problem with this IRSA thing as of now, is that if I'll create another service account, and if I'll try to map that IAM role with that service account, it will be mapped, and I'll get the same IAM role access with another service account. So if I'll do that thing, so if I'll create one more service account, let's say I'll create one service account, kubectl create service account Balvinder, and within this particular service account, if I'll map that IAM role, I have namespace default Balvinder. So this Balvinder service account will be able to get access to that S3 bucket, which should not be the case, right? We should only give that access to that S3 bucket only to one service account, right? Okay, wait, let me try to explain it more clearly. So as of now, what we have done is we have our EKS cluster, and within this EKS cluster we have a pod or a deployment which is running that pod, right? Let's assume there's a pod and there's a service account named nginx, right? So this particular pod is using this nginx uh, service account, and this particular service account is assuming that IAM role that we have created, and this IAM role is allowing that particular S3 bucket access. So this is the flow that we have done at the moment using IRSA. So there is one problem with this. If I'll create one more service account and I'll give it a name, let's say Balvinder, and within this particular service account, if I'll map this service account with the same IAM role, right, and I'll create one more pod, and I'll map this pod with the Balvinder service account. So this another pod or another deployment will be able to access the S3 bucket, right? So this is the problem at the moment. So how we can solve this problem is within our IAM role. If I'll go to the IAM role that I have created, yeah. So within my trust policy, I haven't mentioned anything about the service account, like which service account would be should be able to assume this IAM role. At the moment, I only have defined this particular EKS cluster should be able to access, should be able to assume this IAM role. But which service account should be able to access that IAM role, that I haven't defined it here. So it can be done over here. So within our condition, what I can put here is I'll just put a sub here, and over here I'll just define the namespace and the service account name which should be able to assume this IAM role, right? So it can be done like this. I'll have to search for it. I don't remember the syntax. Uh, yeah, something like this. So I'll just paste it here. So over here, the system service account, the name. So here it should be the namespace. So it should be default for my case. But if you're using any another namespace, so it should be the namespace. And over here, it should be the service account name. So Nginx, right? I'll update the policy. So now what will happen? Only this particular Nginx service account within the default namespace should be able to access this particular IAM role. So now this particular path will be blocked, right? So this is how we can do it using IRSA. Now the other thing is how we can do it using pod identity agent. So now the other thing we'll try to do is using pod identity agent, and we'll see what benefit we are getting using pod identity agent, right? So we have understood the complexity with IRSA, and all of these complexities are not with the pod identity agent. It's quite simpler to do, right? So let's uh, go to my EKS cluster, and what I'll do is I'll just delete everything that I have created. So I have created a service account, so I'll just delete that service account. So kubectl delete service account Nginx Balvinder. So there are two service accounts that I had created. I'll just delete the deployment. Sorry, deployment Nginx, which I had created. So at the moment, there's nothing in the cluster. And from this IAM, what I'll do is I'll just remove this identity provider that we have created. We don't need it now because we are going to use pod identity agent now. So that has been removed. Perfect. So yeah, let's start for the pod identity agent. So what I'll do is, uh, so the first thing for using a pod identity agent is to have that add-on installed in our Kubernetes cluster. So I don't have that pod identity agent add-on. So I'll just quickly install that one. So I'll go to my add-ons. So there's Amazon EKS pod identity agent. I'll select this one. I'll just go and install this one. I'll select the version, latest version here. Next, create. So as soon as I'll install this pod identity agent, if I'll do a watch kubectl get pods in kube system namespace, I could see there are two new pods up and running. So these are running as a daemon sets, which are, so a daemon set in Kubernetes is basically a pod running in each of the nodes, right? So this is how a pod identity agent is running. So now what we'll have to do is I'll just control C here. I'll create a I'll create a deployment again. So the same Nginx deployment here. So I'll create a kubectl deploy Nginx using image Nginx, right? If I'll do kubectl get pod, there's a pod up and running. So at the moment, again, this pod will not have access to that S3 bucket because we haven't configured anything at the moment. So what I'll do is I'll try to create an IAM role now. So within the EKS cluster, I'll create another IAM role. So this IAM role is not going to be the web identity, which was the case with IRSA, right? This is going to be the EKS. So I'll select a EKS service, and within this EKS cluster, EKS services, this is going to be the EKS pod identity, right? And from here, this particular role should have three read-only access. Yeah, I'll give it a name. Let's say S3 read only access PIA, pod identity agent, right? So if we look into this trust policy, so this is quite simple. So the service that we are allowing is pods.eks.amazon.aws.com. So this is the AWS service which is going to assume this IAM role, and we'll just create this role, and from our EKS cluster, what I'll have to do is, let's see, let me refresh the page. Okay, so our pod identity agent is in active state. So let me show you how it's going to work here is, so we have pod identity agent. So within our Kubernetes cluster, we have a deployment, and we have a service account here. So we'll have to create a service account within our Kubernetes cluster for that as well. But as within the case of this IRSA, we have created the service account, and within this service account we have mapped this IAM role, right? We don't have to do this with the pod identity agent. We'll just have to simply create a service account. We don't have to annotate this service account anymore, and there will be a pod, nginx pod. So within this nginx pod, we'll have to pass that this particular pod should use this particular service account, and that's it. And now from AWS console, we'll map that particular service account from EKS cluster from the AWS console. So that I'll show you here. So first, let's create this service account. So I'll go to my terminal. I'll create the service account. kubectl create service account nginx. That's it. And within my AWS console, what I'll do is I'll go to this access tab, and over here, if you'll see, there's a pod identity association. So here we will create one pod identity association, right? And as soon as we'll create this pod identity association, it has identified this one IAM role that we have created, which has pods.eks.amazonaws.com as a trust policy. So this is that particular service account. And from Kubernetes namespace, we can select the namespace, and we can select the service account. That's it. We'll create it. And now if we'll go to my terminal, if I'll do kubectl edit deploy nginx, and over here I'll just mention it should be service account name nginx, right? So if I'll do kubectl get pods, I, I should be able to see, okay, a new pod has been up and running 3 seconds ago. So this is, sorry, this is the new pod which has that service account that we just created. So I'll just quickly kubectl exec, I'll just quickly get into this particular pod, and I'll uh, I'll install that AWS CLI again. Okay, so AWS CLI is installed, and if I'll do AWS S3 LS, I could see a new S3 bucket. I could see my S3 bucket is there. So this is done using pod identity agent, and as you can see, this is quite simpler to implement, not very much complicated as IRSA. So if I'll compare the two IAM roles that we have created, so this is for the IRSA. If I'll open this one, and if I'll open the one which has the pod identity agent, so yeah, this is the IRSA, and yeah. On my left, this is the pod identity agent, the IAM role for pod identity agent, and on the right, this is the IAM role for IRSA. So the trust policy looks like this for IRSA, which is quite complicated. For IRSA, we'll have to create that identity provider in IAM, but if we are using pod identity agent, we don't have to create any identity provider. So the manageability is quite easy, and we could simplify the process. So if we are using any IAC tool, for example Terraform, so we can simply create that pod identity agent, pod identity association using Terraform, and we can very easily provide access to any of the deployment in Kubernetes cluster. So I hope this would be helpful for you. So this is it for this video.